Um, as has become our practice, I'm going to read a psalm, and other folks have reasons for picking their psalms. I opened my Bible, and this is where it landed. That is my. But when I read it, I thought, okay, yeah, so this worked. So this is Psalm 50. And according to my Bible, this is a psalm of Asaph. And I didn't think to look at that earlier, so I have no idea who Asaph is.
I don't know
Okay.
if it's Psalm 50. Well, this one isn't going to tell me.
Yeah. The mighty one, sorry, I've got a burp stuck in there. The mighty one, God the Lord, speaks and summons the earth from the rising of the sun to its setting. So you see how that ties back to what we did last week. Out of Zion, the perfect of beauty, God shines forth. Our God comes and does not keep silence. Before him is a devouring fire and a mighty tempest all around him. He calls to the heavens above and to the earth that he may judge his people. Gather to me my faithful ones who made a covenant with me by sacrifice. The heavens declare his righteousness, for God himself is judge. Selah. Hear, O my people, and I will speak. O Israel, I will testify against you. I am God, your God. Not for your sacrifices do I rebuke you. Your burnt offerings are continually before me. I will not accept a bull from your house or goats from your folds, for every wild animal of the forest is mine, the cattle on 1,000 hills. I know all the birds of the air, and all that moves in the field is mine. If I were hungry, I would not tell you, for the world and all that is in it is mine. Do I eat the flesh of bulls or drink the blood of goats? Offer to God a sacrifice of thanksgiving, and pay your vows to the Most High. Call on me in the middle of trouble, I will deliver you, and you shall glorify me. But to the wicked God says, what right have you to recite my statutes, or take my covenant on your lips? For you hate discipline, and you cast my words behind you. You make friends with a thief when you see one, and you keep company with adulterers. You give your mouth free rein for evil, and your tongue frames deceit. You sit and speak against your king. You slander your own mother's child. These things you have done, and I have been silent. You thought I was one just like yourself, but now I rebuke you and lay the charge before you. Mark this then, you who forget God, or I will tear you apart, and there will be no one to deliver. Those who bring thanksgiving as their sacrifice honor me. To those who go the right way, I will show the salvation of God.
Couldn't have picked a shorter one, huh?
What jumped out at me, Sarah, was the keeping company with adulterers, because isn't that what Jesus did a lot of his,
Yeah,
Right.
his little paradigm shift right there?
yeah. It's all a paradigm shift. We think we have a paradigm and it shifts.
Yeah. I
Whatever.
hate it when my paradigm shifts.
Yeah, I know. Okay, so any other comments about that? But I like, where it talked about God said, this is all mine.
Uh-huh.
You know,
That brought to mind the famous saying from Cindy, who would say, remember whose you are. Not who you are, but
yeah,
whose you
that's
are.
what she would tell her kids when they left the house. Remember who you are and remember whose you are.
Oh,
Yeah. Okay, so last week Angie covered a fair amount of the prologue, and that was about as much as our author did, so I'm going to start with chapter 2. And Laura, let me show you what we're doing. This, yeah, wrong place. This is the book we're using, and the woman who writes this is a Orthodox Jew, and she has a PhD in theology and teaches most recently at Vanderbilt, although she may be retired by now because she's older than I am.
No, she's not.
She's not?
No, she's my age.
Oh, okay, she's only a few years younger, because there's not 3 years between us, okay. But this does not do the whole gospel, it picks up half a dozen stories. But you know how we like to talk, so we figure this will last us several minutes.
Perfect.
Okay, so, being a good teacher, what do y'all remember? Because all of you were here last week. What do you remember about the prologue? Do a little review here.
I don't remember.
It's long.
That's what I was gonna
The
say.
order out
It
of
was long.
chaos.
It was only 18 verses, and Angie only got through 9
Oh, it's
of
only
them.
14.
The word was there in the beginning, and God
Yeah.
brought order out of chaos. And
Right,
light.
and it reminds us of the creation story.
Right, John, and the author frequently will make the point, at least with what I've read so far, that John knows his Bible, his Old Testament, that we would call it. And the more you know the Old Testament, the more you see those connections. And so the people that John was writing for would have known their
Yes.
Bible, and therefore they would have gotten more out of it. So I like and this may be part of your saying she's jumping around. I like the way she does go back and grab this from Isaiah and grab this from somewhere, she's taking me back to the Old Testament because I don't know it well enough to make those connections. So that's one thing I like about her.
But
Can I
today's
ask a question? Does this author believe that John is the disciple John or some other John?
some other John.
Some other John.
Well, that's a shame.
Oh, well.
Oh, well.
Yeah.
Hey, Harold.
Ah,
How you doing, Harold?
doing good.
Okay, glad to hear it. Okay. So, today we're going to talk about the wedding at Cana. So before we get into it, let's talk about your experiences with weddings. What's the most recent wedding you went to?
Ours. No? Oh, okay, got it. Jasmine's.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Jasmine.
Jasmine.
Yeah.
Jasmine and Sam.
Okay, what's your most, because I don't think you were at Jasmine's.
I'm trying to think. It was probably my niece Danielle's.
Okay. So the one that the four of us went to recently, Jasmine Heath, daughter of Ann and Kevin, and sometimes you see Kevin is in here. And she got married, a month ago?
Yeah, the
3 weeks ago.
31st.
Yeah, 31st of August.
Yeah, end of August. It was a lovely ceremony, and then a reception afterwards. And her mother, some of y'all don't know this, her mother used to be a wedding or an event planner and frequently did weddings. And now she has become a licensed wedding officiant for the state of Virginia. And the guy that actually performed the ceremony was from North Carolina, so Ann had to be the one to sign the license.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, if you're not certified. Who's coming on? Is that Janet?
Stuart's switching devices.
Oh, okay.
Okay,
Okay.
Heard is weddings and funerals bring out people's true colors,
Okay.
and sometimes they're not always the best.
No. And at the reception, I sat next to Vicki Brooks, and I always had heard that Cindy and Vicki could write a book about their experiences with weddings. So I asked Vicki what was the craziest thing she ever went through. And she thought for a few minutes, and she said this was one that Paul Simrel presided over, and that the bride was in the limo in the parking lot, so drunk she could barely walk, and was just refusing to come in to her own wedding. And Paul sent Vicki, because Vicki was female, he thought, go get her in here. And so the organist had to go get the bride into the church.
Maybe she didn't want to be in the church.
Well, the wedding did manage to go on, but the funniest story I ever heard Cindy tell, and of course Cindy put the kibosh on it real quick, there was a bride that wanted her dog to be the ring bearer. Yeah, and Cindy said, no, this is a worship service. You don't bring pets into a worship service. And some of us at the table, I don't know, you were at a different table, but we were sitting there going, if Cindy had been the officiant here, the photographer would not have been in that sanctuary.
It has always concerned me. I mean, if you go back, I don't know, 30 years, this place was booked up solid. I mean,
Right.
solid for weddings. As a matter of fact, when I was married the first time here, Mr. Coleman called me up and told me that there was another couple who wanted to get married the same day before us, and it was like one of those military things, they had to get married real fast, and would we object to them using the sanctuary before us, and it would be cleaned up, and I said, oh, no, go ahead, that was
Yeah.
fine. But this place was so packed and so booked up, they were like doing double-decker weddings on some days. And now it's, everybody goes to a venue
Yeah.
as opposed to a church.
And sometimes people call here wanting a venue, expecting things to operate
Right.
The
at
way
the
a
church
venue would.
like a venue does.
Yeah.
And so,
And it
To
does.
include wine?
oh, yeah.
No, who
Oh,
can-
no. So,
What, alcohol?
alcohol being a minor issue?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
I mean,
had
people
both of my
want-
weddings were here.
Huh?
Both of my weddings were here.
Aw. But you know, at venues, you have certain or certain services that just aren't available at a church.
Yeah.
And sometimes people have no concept of that. Because we've
Because
got a
they've
whole
never been in a
generation
church.
that's
Well, yeah,
become accustomed to weddings being at venues and all the services that are available at a venue, and they think, oh, you have a wedding somewhere, you can do all that stuff, anywhere you go for a wedding.
I keep telling Jennifer, her elopement fund grows every day.
yeah, and back when you were
Yeah.
talking, we were unusual in that we let non-members be married here and we charged them a considerable fee. We made 10% of our budget on wedding
Mhm.
income. And now it's just a drop in the bucket.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
so we've
Yeah, we
already,
were that pretty Victorian church on Buford Road that everybody wanted to get married in.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, we used to call ourselves the Wedding Chapel of Bon here.
yeah.
So I'm real happy my third wedding was here.
Yeah, I hope my second and third are here too. She's not on, is she?
No, she's not. Okay, so, would somebody, open their Bible and read John chapter 2, verse 1?
Just verse 1?
Just, we're gonna go through this good and slow.
Okay. On the third day, there was a wedding at Cana in Galilee.
Okay, so, one thing that she, the author goes back to, she talks about the wedding scene, and she reminisces about the first couple in Genesis, who were not named Adam and Eve, they were just, male and female. And, there's nothing in Genesis that says they were married, that was a later tradition. And she also notes in here that it wasn't until the Middle Ages that the forbidden fruit was an apple.
Because it doesn't say.
No, it doesn't. And I'm not sure apples would grow there anyway.
How old was Jesus at this wedding?
Well, according to this gospel, he has not yet, has he been baptized? John doesn't baptize him here. This is his first.
Miracle.
This is his
Miracle.
first
Right.
miracle.
So if you go with the tradition that we get from the synoptics, he's maybe 30.
Right.
Okay, if you go from the traditions that may be Catholic, he was 12 to 15.
Huh?
Yeah,
Really?
yeah. At least that's what I remember.
Because he's already called his disciples
He's called at least.
in
one or
chapter
two.
1.
Well, see, they didn't tell us that. So we believe it. Seriously, I assumed he was in his teens.
Mm-mm.
Okay.
No, he is.
Who put chapter 1 and chapter 2 together.
Yeah.
As a
John
kid,
just
you're not.
Disciples were also called
That's
to the
true.
wedding.
Yeah,
That's
As
true.
a kid, you're just focused on what you're reading.
right.
Right,
So,
right. No, I
Yeah.
skimmed.
And
through
even
chapter
in my
1.
Baptist tradition, I remember being in a Sunday school class and we talked about Lot and his wife,
Uh-huh.
and Sodom and Gomorrah and the wife disobeying God and turning into salt and
Yeah.
it stopped. Well, and this was down in Mississippi, in this 50 years ago, so you can imagine how conservative things were. But there was a guy in the Sunday school class who said, "Keep on reading." Because do y'all know what comes after that story? Lot's daughters are with him. Mom's dead.
Yeah.
Lot and his daughters have escaped into the mountains, and the daughters are saying, finish the story, you know it.
They wanted children and there was no men available except their father.
Yeah,
They
so
got him drunk.
they got him drunk
Got him
and
drunk
had
up.
sex with him so they could have kids.
Mm.
Not something, not something that I've ever seen discussed in a Sunday school book.
Except this one.
Well, it's not in this book.
It's not in this book, you're right, not in the Sunday
But
school
yeah.
book, that story gets skipped over.
But yeah, talking about what you're allowed to put together or not put together, yeah, even as a Baptist, some very interesting things were skipped.
Yeah. Yeah, seriously, they always led us to believe that he was very, very young, and we just assumed, or with other context, that he was 12 to 15 years old. It was his first out, like you have a bar mitzvah because he's Jewish. Okay, this was one of the first events that he could go to as a young adult. Okay, so that was the connotations that were conveyed to us little Catholic kids. So,
I'll be darned.
Pretty obnoxious of him at that age to address his mother as woman. What's it to
well,
me, woman?
mother was the way it was always, not woman.
Yeah,
So,
but John uses the word woman.
Yeah,
no, here
Which
it says,
suggests an older
no,
Jesus.
this is Jesus' mother was there.
But no, in verse 4, when she tells him to fix the problem, he looks at her and says, "Woman, what business is it of yours?"
No, here's verse 4 is, "You must not tell me what to do." Jesus replied, "My time has not yet come."
and mine says, "Your concern, mother, is not mine."
So the
So I
word
guess it
woman
is-
is Baptist, apparently. You were hardliners, weren't you?
Oh, no, I mean, that's what this book is saying, that he calls her, he says,
Yeah.
woman.
And
Well.
Jesus said to her, "What to me and to you, woman? My hour has not yet come."
Well, that's one of those, it's probably one of those subtleties,
Yeah.
You
in
know,
the
language.
Yeah.
that,
Okay, well, 2 out of 3 Bibles say that woman was not said, right, Kathy?
Well, if they're all based on that King James version, that was one of the weaker
Yeah.
ones
yes.
around at the time when they were.
no,
Converting.
these translations would not have been based off of that.
No, this is true
But,
translation from the scrolls and that supposedly.
So the one in here or the one in there?
This
His Good News Bible,
Good
one of my
News.
professors was one of the,
translators,
for the Old Testament
okay,
of the Good News Bible.
yeah.
But
So what
a guy
source
named
is
Bruce
AJ
Metzger translated the New
I
Testament.
think she may be doing her own.
Oh.
Okay, so going back to weddings, she's talking about going back to the first couple in Genesis. It was only later that the tradition understood the couple to be married. And the point is made clear in the Synoptic Gospels. They all pretty much tell the same story in the same order. John has a different chronology and different stories, including this wedding, where Jesus is discussing divorce and remarriage and appeals back to Genesis 2. From the beginning of creation, God made them male and female, and on account of this, a man shall leave his father and his mother and cleave to his woman. The Greek word can also mean wife, and the two shall become one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined, let no man separate, which is taken out of Mark. So, you
So
probably-
that means we don't need a state license to be wedded.
It depends on what you might want to use. To me, the only reason for a state license is that it declares you next of kin, and if you need to be next to your wife in the hospital and making decisions, if you don't have that piece of paper, you don't get to make those decisions.
Yeah. That's society. That's our society. According to God, I don't think you need it. I mean, if you think about all the societies, all the, people that have lived on this earth, very few have had a preacher. Like it says, you cleave to a woman, and, the two of you, it's like geese.
Right, yeah,
Uh,
they,
Sarah,
Yeah, mm,
I have to disagree with you on the point about, being by the side of somebody that's passing away and that you need that license to make decisions for them. When I was making them for my second husband, whom we had been divorced for, over 20 years, I made all of his decisions and I was never asked for anything.
how long ago was that?
He died in 2001.
Yeah,
That might be just for this state because my sister, Norma Jean, her husband died about a week after a year that it took for her divorce in Maryland to be final. So when he died a week after it became final, 1 year after the divorce date, uh, Norma Jean couldn't do anything. So I had to go up when my brother-in-law's sister, the two of us, worked with the two kids. At the time, the kids were 20 and 18, I think. Okay, and we actually had to go in, and they signed all the papers at the funeral, at the church, everything. So in Maryland, once you're divorced, you can't.
You're not next of kin.
You're not next to kin anymore. So I think it might be state by state.
yeah, probably is.
So-
Probably is.
Yeah,
We had been divorced since 1979. So, there was a long time in between. But
Right.
he was an only child, and our son was in the Navy in Japan. That left me.
uh-huh, yeah.
but the author is talking about prehistoric traditions here, not our laws that come and go in modern society. In these prehistoric or ancient societies, you just said we're married or we're together. That was it. That's all it took. And wasn't it the slaves that created a ceremony where they just jumped over a broom handle? And so it's we
Yeah.
make up stuff to collect taxes, but we
Right.
don't need it.
Yeah, and I also have read that, and not going back too much farther in history, that in Europe, unless you had property, you really didn't need to get married. The only reason to get married was to make sure you had a legal heir to inherit your property or maybe your title. And if you didn't have a title or property, you didn't need that piece of paper. You said, we're together, we form a household and have kids, and nobody cared.
So society evolves.
Yeah, so society evolves over
Right.
time.
Right, so
Okay.
going back to verse 4, the NRSV says woman, and I
Okay.
think that's what she uses,
Okay,
the NRSV and the NIV.
okay. So anyway, if you remember, in the synoptics, Jesus talks about leaving your family to follow him, and somewhere he talks about, if you can stand not to be married, you're better off. If you make yourself a eunuch on my behalf, you're better off. Paul says, live a single life unless you absolutely have to be married. And she talks about that, goes into great depth, but she doesn't say the one thing that came to my mind as a result of conversations we've had in this class, which was, why did they say that? Don't get married. You don't need to be married.
Because they thought the end times were right around the corner.
They thought the end times were right around the corner, so you didn't need the distraction of a wife and kids. And she doesn't mention that. She just says, the synoptics make it sound like Jesus was anti-marriage. Paul kind of sounds anti-marriage. John fixes that, is kind of the way she puts it. So she also,
But John was written later too.
right, exactly. John was written later.
Some theologians say it was, some theologians say not so much. Now, there is absolutely a case to be made that it wasn't written as, a long time afterwards. Sometime afterwards, but not.
Well, yeah, it was 10 to 30 years after
Right,
the other
but a long
Gospels.
enough time afterward that they were if they hadn't already given up on the idea, they were beginning to give up on the idea that the end time was gonna happen immediately. Immediately was gone.
I think the church too realized that the importance of being fruitful and multiplying, because that's how you grow the church.
Yeah. Yeah, so, so she says that up until a fairly recent time, many, if not most, biblical scholars believed that John did not have access to the Synoptic Gospels. And she says that actually one of her graduate students did a lot of research and has maybe changed that attitude. And she thinks John did have the Synoptic Gospels in front of him, and where he doesn't think they're wrong, she thinks that he thought that maybe they were incomplete. And so he's emphasizing a wedding because there's so much stuff in the Synoptics and Paul's letters that, sounds anti-marriage. And he wants to say, no, Jesus was very much pro-marriage, so his first miracle is taking place at a wedding.
Well, what I've did some research too, and John has a lot of detail the synoptics does not have. Things like the Passover dinner. John says it was a week before Passover. Synoptics, it was the night before. And so there's quite a bit of detail and differences in John than in the synoptics, according to some theologians.
Right. The week before, I thought John had the Passover dinner the day before the synoptics. Was it the week before?
Well, maybe the research I did was wrong, but they were saying John had it the week before.
Okay.
That's something I would look up more now that I'm thinking about it. But that's what quite a bit of the research that I looked at all said that John had it the week before, which came as a big surprise to me.
I knew he had it before. Okay. Yeah, let me know what you come up with, and I'll try to remember to look at it too, but my memory doesn't work. So
It's kind of like going to a movie where you see the scenes that were deleted from the original release.
yeah. Okay.
New unreleased material.
Now, going back to church legends, one early church legend cast the bride at the wedding as Mary Magdalene stranded at the altar when Jesus calls the groom to be one of his followers. So, yeah, and this is just one of these crazy church traditions that, came out of the early church. Yeah, I'd never heard that one. I didn't know if it was something that had stayed with the church.
No, you can blame some stuff on the Catholics, but not that one.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, what would you do if you found out she was a prostitute?
But she wasn't.
I know.
But
You're just adding one story on top of another.
yeah. Okay, so did we ever get around to reading verse 1?
We read verse 1.
Yes.
Okay. Go back and read it again because I want to pick up a particular phrase.
All right, on the third day.
That phrase. Okay. The third day after what? We
Right.
don't know.
At the end of chapter 1, talks about on what happened the first day and the second day. On the second
And what
day,
were they?
Nathan. Jesus
was-
calls Nathan.
He calls his disciples.
Yeah.
Right. The
And
next,
then and after
back in
Nathan,
1:35, the next day again, John was standing with two of his disciples when Jesus passed by. Yeah, because John did baptize him in chapter 1. So the next day,
it almost sounds
and
like
the next day, Jesus decided, in verse 43, Jesus decided to leave for Galilee. He met Philip, who like Andrew and Peter came from Bethsaida, and said to him, "Follow me." And so he called Nathanael, and Nathanael says, how do you come to know me? And Jesus said, I saw you under the fig tree before Philip spoke to you. Rabbi said, ooh, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel. So, yeah, so I guess that's where the third day is.
Okay,
Yeah, mine says 2 days later. Doesn't say on the third day. It says 2 days later to start.
okay. She makes a point of how many on the third day phrases, how many times
John
that phrase,
uses that.
well, not
Oh.
just John.
Oh,
Genesis 22:4. When Abraham looked up and saw the mountain of the Lord where he was to sacrifice his son. So somebody grabbed Genesis 22:4, because she's not giving me enough information here.
Maybe third day refers to the day of the week. They rested on the seventh day, so Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, maybe that's just their way of saying Wednesday.
all right, so Genesis 22:4. On the third day, Abraham looked up and saw the place far away. Then Abraham said to his young men, stay here with the donkey. The boy and I will go over there. We will worship, and then
Okay.
we will come back to you.
So it's just the third day. And on the third day, in terms of creation, that was when God gathers the water to create both seas and the dry land. What's the most famous third day?
Jesus
Resurrection.
Right.
Right.
So, and it was on the third day that God let Moses into his presence on Mount Sinai.
Oh.
So,
So that's a time reference that
yeah, so it,
is familiar to us.
Yeah.
Not just,
yeah,
For
not just
Christians.
not coincidentally, but yeah.
right,
Would have been familiar to the Jewish folks at the time.
right.
Okay. So there is no baptism of Jesus in the fourth gospel. I'm reading from
Oh,
the
there's a
book.
testimony by John the Baptist, sorry. There's
Oh,
a
okay.
testimony by John the Baptist. I saw John the Baptist and
Okay,
there,
yeah,
this is the testimony given by John when the Jews sent priests and Levites from Jerusalem to ask him, who are you? He confessed and did not deny it, but confessed, I am not the Messiah. What then, are you Elijah? And so he went on to tell them.
right, so somewhere
I
in
am
there
the voice of one
she
crying.
talks about how each gospel, in order of their writing, downplays John's role. And so John,
Oh,
so the fourth gospel takes it to so he doesn't baptize Jesus at all. So there's no way he can be shown to be in any way above Jesus. And to this day, so I learned something today, to this day, there is a group called wrong place, Wikipedia, please be there. The Mandaeans. This is a Middle Eastern ethno-religious group, and they believe that John the Baptist was the final and most important prophet. And they still exist today. They may have been among the earliest religion groups to practice baptism, as well as among the earliest adherents of Gnosticism, a belief system which they are the last surviving representatives today. They were originally native speakers of Mandaic, which is an Eastern Aramaic language, before they switched to maybe Persian. After the invasion of Iraq by the United States and its allies in 2003, the Mandaean community of Iraq, which before the war numbered 60 to 70,000 people, collapsed due to the rise of Islamic extremism and the absence of protection against it, with most of the community relocating to Iran, Syria, and Jordan, or forming diaspora communities beyond the Middle East. They have been forcibly converted to Islam, making them apostates if they revert to their own religion. By 2007, the population in Iraq had fallen to 5,000, and they're estimated to be 60,000 to 100,000 worldwide. Australia and Sweden have the largest communities.
What prophets
Well,
do John?
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to overtalk. Was Nancy saying something?
yeah,
I was just asking, what prophets do we have after John?
That's what I was asking. I think John is the last prophet.
Yeah, that's what I was taught.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I never
Yeah,
really,
so,
in honesty, I really hadn't even thought of John as being a prophet. That had never really been,
but,
I mean, it makes sense.
Prepare the
I
way of the
understand.
Lord.
Yeah.
Yeah,
yeah,
prepare the way for the Lord.
but I'd never, with all of the stuff we've read, I had never heard of the Mandeans.
That's interesting.
Mhm.
Okay,
Yeah, so,
cool.
Well, if
Thank
we
you.
think he was the last greatest prophet, does that make us Mandeans?
but they worship him.
Oh, no, we don't do that.
Yeah, so,
Well-
We think highly of him, but we don't,
Yeah.
we don't worship him.
If he's the last prophet, what's that make Muhammad again?
An afterthought.
A false prophet.
Well, that's a whole nother subject.
Well, it's not a very long one.
Okay,
okay. So, going back to what I was doing here.
If you'd like, I'll bring next week, the parts out of the Quran that talk about Jesus wasn't the Son of God. Jesus wasn't crucified. Jesus wasn't resurrected from the dead. I mean, if that doesn't make a false prophet, then I can bring those verses in and, if y'all like.
well, we're working on John.
Yeah, and the teacher for next week isn't here. So, thank you, but,
Well, hold that thought. If next week's class turns south, you can introduce them. No.
Actually, Harold, text me those, verses. I'd be interested in checking them out.
Okay. Okay.
okay, so, the author gives 7 different reasons for, why would John start the story, basically, with a wedding?
Weddings are beginnings.
Okay,
Well,
And what-
wasn't Christ called the groom at times?
yes. And she talks about that at some length. Even though it's not his wedding, the imagery does remind us of the tradition of Jesus as the bridegroom, with the church being the bride. And I've already talked about how the synoptics appear to downplay marriage and family, and John is raising it up. And going back to what you just said, Harold, the image of Jesus as a bridegroom draws upon the motif in Israel's scriptures of God as the bridegroom and then the husband of Israel. And I don't know that I had picked up that much on that. Fifth, the wedding imagery with its abundance of wine is a foretaste of the messianic banquet when the Lord of hosts will make for all people on this mountain a feast of rich food and a feast of well-aged wine, of rich food filled with marrow, of well-aged wine strained clear, which is out of Isaiah 25. 6, wedding imagery anticipates other scenes in the gospel from the discussion of Jesus between the discussion of marriage between Jesus and the Samaritan woman in John 4. And,
Good. Back up just a second. That image of the wine and the well-fed, does that not relate to Christ using those terms as this is at the Last Supper, this is my body, you won't, and this is my blood, which is the wine, meaning spirit, so that's kind of tying all that in also to what she's saying, I think.
yeah, I think so too. And 7th, weddings are the start of new families. And Jesus is starting a new family of sorts. So she makes that analogy. And then in the last phrase of this verse, John introduces the mother of Jesus. And he doesn't use the word Mary, and the author talks about how, there are too many Marys and it can be confusing. And that another group called the Valentinians, if I remember correctly, just saw Mary as a vessel through which Jesus came like water goes through a pipe. That she had no purpose other than incubation to, she didn't give any,
Didn't really have any spiritual value. Is that?
right, yeah, she just provided a way for him to become a human.
Uh-huh.
She didn't give any genetic, she didn't provide any genes for his,
Oh,
and
okay.
and she also makes the point that Joseph is never mentioned because in John, God is the father of Jesus, period. No more, we don't need anything else.
Mhm.
So.
Well,
so-
Joseph's not in Mark either, is he?
No, because there's no nativity at all in Mark.
Right.
And I remember the first time I read something that pointed it out, the earliest gospel had no nativity, and then Luke had the stable. Matthew has the wise men, but Jesus could have been as much as 3 years old when that was written. And then John just goes all the way back to history,
At the beginning of time.
to the beginning of-
creation.
Yeah.
Right.
So, yes, Grandma.
Catherine's being
Yes,
baptized today.
yes, yeah.
That's
Yeah,
right.
for those of you that didn't hear, her youngest granddaughter is being baptized in about 15 minutes, so she's going to make sure she gets a good seat. So, John just doesn't make a big deal out of her biology. Now, verse 2, gosh, we went even slower than I thought we would. Since you've got it, Kathy, can you read verse 2?
Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding.
Now, she makes the point that in 21st century America, if I'm invited, I don't assume that anybody related to me in any way is invited. If you're invited, you get an invitation. And so she speculates that, did Jesus' mother say y'all come? She also makes the point that in that culture, if you had disciples, they were considered to be like your sons, part of the family. And Cana was about 9 miles from Nazareth, so they could have easily walked it. And having them there, it would have been a village. It was a small village, but at that time Galilee was very prosperous. So having 2 or 3 more, because like you said, he hadn't called them all yet. He's only called a handful of his disciples. Having, 3 or 4 more guys there to eat wouldn't have been a big deal. Now today it's a big deal because you gotta pay the caterer. And yeah, I heard Ann complain that somebody told her they'd be there and she paid for a meal they didn't eat. So she was.
Well, I would have thought in older times that you're saying that Mary invited Jesus or suggested that he come. I would have thought that it'd have to be the bride, the groom, or their
Or their
family,
parents.
or their parents.
Well, yeah, and I
Because those
personally
were
think
pretty
the
strict
author.
times. Remember, traditional Jewish war back then was it was strict as to who does what and when, particularly when there were ceremonies involved.
Yeah.
So
And I may not be remembering that exactly, but yeah, but she does talk about how it's possible that bringing the disciples was kind of a little extra add-on. But yeah, very much in a patriarchal society, so it's very possible that, it was expected that the father of the bride and the father of the groom were doing all the inviting.
right.
So I don't know. But that, so she makes the point that Jesus and his disciples were invited, but not Jesus, and his mother was invited, but none of his siblings.
That we know of.
That we know of.
Yeah, but his siblings aren't mentioned in the Bible very much at all.
Yeah,
That's
once
true.
or twice,
So I mean,
Yeah.
maybe twice.
so
We have very little information about weddings in Galilee in the first century, so they kind of extrapolate from general village customs. Weddings in villages, and Cana was certainly, would have been a small, would have been a communal affair where everybody would have joined in.
well, I think we can think that Joseph wasn't there either, because if Jesus said woman to his mother, Joseph would have knocked him silly. No matter what his age was.
But in very patriarchal societies, would that be true? I mean, don't sons mouth off at daughters because they're male?
Well, I think in a previous class, somewhere we covered, our esteemed teachers told us that term was not negative back then, like we assume it is now.
That must be the case.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. I'm glad you remember.
Right, so and I think, Harold, I would agree with you on that, because some of the Bibles say mother, so that maybe literally that it might, because the NRSV tends to be the more literal translation, and so I was probably wrong in that, saying that the subtlety is that the word woman here really referred more to the mother role
Not
being,
just woman.
than just woman.
Yeah.
Right.
So, she made the last part of this verse, and then we'll have to stop. She makes the point that today, when we've done the flowers and the caterer and the photographer and made sure the bridesmaids' dresses are all the way they're supposed to be, do we invite Jesus to the wedding today? And I think that's, you know, Anne Heath, when she does weddings, she asks, the first question she asks the bride is, do you want a religious ceremony or not? Because a lot of times they're not,
Right. Right.
you know, and how that's, should be the most important guest at a wedding would be Jesus.
Well, that was the first invitation that Jesus got, and it said plus 12.
Very good.
Yeah,
Oh.
okay, good.
So.
Very good.
Okay, well, thank you, folks.